the exciting part. All right. So Mackenzie. Mackenzie is a values-driven, service-minded advocate dedicated to making those she works with and the communities she works with the best versions of themselves. Over the last decade, she has worked in various capacities as a program coordinator, a coach, mentor, and a manager. Whew. She deeply values justice, equity, inclusivity, and diversity. She loves leading people to their aha moments. We'll get to that later. Put your aha moments and don't be shy. Providing tools, guidance, and resources for individuals and trusting that they will use them to their best ability at the right moment to achieve their personally defined goal, whether in a job readiness program or on a yoga mat. All right, so I'm gonna kick it off and turn the floor over to Mackenzie Stewart.
Thank you, Rashawn, and thank you, Mimi. All out in the open, I was supposed to be making this presentation at December 5th at the larger NYEC conference. And apparently, as soon as I said hello and introduced myself, I went into a tech fumble and presented to no one for 45 minutes. So first off, I'm really grateful for a second chance to speak on this topic, and time too to calm down from embarrassment and fear that I had tarnished the name of JBS and all the positive work that we get to do in our partnership with the NYEC. So thank you again, and I appreciate all of you who are here across the country to connect and learn from us. This was not something I did alone, and so I just want to acknowledge that off the top. My colleagues in the high school bridge department at JBS were, we collaborated on this. We agreed even prior to 2020 lockdown that there needed to be shifts in our program and the way that we were working with and serving young people, and hoping that would flow directly into the larger work of JBS. I'll explain a little bit of that shortly. So thank you all again, and let's hop in. So, we are here today to talk about addressing and dismantling white supremacy within job readiness programming. And I will admit, even in this title, the language used, which being upfront, a lot of what we're going to evaluate today is jargon and language, and how it's used and how that removes barriers or can create further barriers in our work and in the service of the communities. Mostly at this point, I will be thinking of this in relation to the population K, transitional age youth, that the high school bridge department works with, the high school age and K youth. But this is relevant across the board for those who work to support individuals in gaining valuable skills and experience to achieve their job and eventually career goals. So before I get into that, just some background on JBS. We're over 50 years old. We are at JBS in San Francisco Bay Area, and our mission is to transform lives by helping people build skills and find work to achieve self-sufficiency. And self-sufficiency in particular for us does include a salary range, income level, and that dictates the programming opportunities that we develop for people to engage with us in. So we currently are running programming in healthcare, tech, the utilities, and accounting and banking, as well as supporting clients who may be more open to public, just needing support in accelerating their job search. And then myself and my colleagues within the high school bridge team do work a little more closely within the San Francisco Unified School District, and once students have graduated, support them as well with different transition pathway programs, including utilities track program. So it's, we could be working with a young person and their family as well, each of them in different programming with the hope of getting them into a work-based learning opportunity, an internship, and eventually a full-time job placement that allows for them to earn an income to be self-sufficient and support themselves and their families. So across the board, all of JVS does engage in what we traditionally know as job readiness programming, identified in those like developing soft skills, deeper knowledge of an industry, and making them a competitive individual once they're applying to jobs. Additionally, we do a lot of work in working with employers. So once our clients are at a place where they are looking for jobs, we can direct them to those opportunities with employers that we have relationships with. So this presentation, this idea came up initially, me perusing LinkedIn, and Kim Colhurst, a wonderful partner at Pathways and someone I've interacted with through different trainings and through NYEC as well, shared this post. And I just want to make it clear, I did clear it with Kim that I could share her words before sharing it here, but indeed it sparked something in me. So she wrote, sitting with the notion of job readiness as a construct of white supremacy, a tool to restrict access to our workforce system. The power we have as workforce professionals to deem somebody not job ready, and how that screens people out of vital services and support. We become gatekeepers. So I think Kim's question and comment here is still very relevant. And so I encourage you all to sit with this, because this is what I've been sitting with as well. And it's really informed the work that was already happening within my team, but taking it to another deeper level as well. So I'm hoping you all at the end of this time together will walk away a little more confident in identifying white supremacist characteristics. This presentation that I put together does not assume that anyone is familiar with these characteristics. If you are, that's wonderful. Hopefully you can go a step further or have another different, deeper understanding of certain characteristics. And especially looking at it within professional culture. I want to have that be the lens for you all to understand as well. We were looking specifically at our work cultures, how we interact with each other, how we engage with young people, and how these characteristics may influence the way we send young people out into the work world. Perpetuating these characteristics instead of identifying them and finding alternatives that eventually, through practice and habit, remove them from our society. So the second target is for you all to connect, learning ways to connect with diverse groups of youth around this subject. It's not an easy topic to have, a conversation to have. It's not an easy topic. It's still, you know, I say the words white supremacy more than I've had ever in my life in the last 2-3 years. And it's still not easy. You can still notice the people who tense up, become uncomfortable. That's normal. We all go through it in different ways, especially as we are still processing our own privilege and our own ways that we may intentionally or unintentionally contribute to this part of our culture. But through learning and practicing, we can then teach and see those ripples. And then also finally, developing definitions or competencies that reflect a shift from those what we've understood as the default expectations of being professional, and creating soft skills, executive functions, you know, moving away from those forms of language into more abundant development, coaching style language in order to end the perpetuating harm of white supremacy. So some equity principles that I'd like to share here. These are I'll be referring a lot, and you'll see shortly what I refer to as the characteristics of white supremacy is the work of Kima Okun and those who they collaborate with. And from that work, the racial equity principles you see here were developed as well. These are principles that I consistently work from and influence how I work with young people and consider developing different curriculums or programs. This is the framework in particular. So take a moment. And we're starting and diving in, and I just want to be completely transparent. Heads up, you may feel discomfort. I cannot assume anyone has done any work around this yet. And even if you have, there are still moments of discomfort. And so it's just a message to let you know in this space, there's no intention to make you feel unsafe or attacked. This is a space for you to learn. What you are experiencing, though, is discomfort. But you know, I think you're okay with that if you showed up here today, right? And so I encourage you, if you are feeling that discomfort, I am a yoga teacher and mindfulness teacher as well, so you may find that tension in your chest, or you're finding that your shoulders are slowly easing up and shrugging over. If you at that point, you know, you can step away. You can write a note to yourself and engage later. I see this is being recorded, so you can revisit it. There's no pressure on you to push yourself and get through this all at once. This is a marathon, not a sprint. I say that as someone who does not run marathons, but can still use the metaphor. So, you know, just hold that as well. So let's just get into the clear and most important part that we'll reiterate is, how are we speaking and what is the language we use with those who we are serving? And when we are thinking about developing soft skills, executive functions, in programming, you know, these competencies that we feel like we're able to check off on a report or in writing in a grant report, that these are the topics covered. We just want to check and see, are they really relevant? Are these still the things that we want to see in someone in a workplace? And for me, I just started asking myself outright, what are the characteristics I appreciate in a colleague? You know, am I teaching to that? Am I teaching to the young person in the classroom that I don't need you to change your tone and demeanor of your speech, but I would like you to, when speaking to me, take your time and feel confident in the words that you're saying. And if you're not feeling apologetic or fearful, but instead knowing that you can find space between us to communicate in some way that is appropriate for who you are. We're so interested in, you know, like being productive and moving things forward. And sometimes that's a lot of pressure for a young person starting out in a workplace, whether it's like an internship, an informational interview, or an actual job placement. Just, you know, stepping back and seeing if you can just ask yourself, before they go in to a space, would I want to work with them as a coworker? Have I supported this young person enough that if there was an opening on my team, I could feel comfortable encouraging them to apply and going through the interview process and having them as a colleague? Or am I instead training them to please an employer that is, always going to be asking for more, and is always seeking the ideal without really being clear what that ideal is. And unfortunately, in those circumstances, we are to assume that means we are training them to code switch, to consistently be subservient, and to not speak up, especially in situations where they may find themselves being disrespected or undermined. Right? These are the areas that we are trying to officially in this new, in this place in our culture and world right now. These are the things that we want to encourage students to recognize and identify, because for so long we've allowed them to continue. So it is up to us to train ourselves and train those that we work with to know when they feel something is off. And also in that same regard, going back to this previous slide, right? It's, what is that discomfort? Can you name it? Are you actually being attacked? That's a different thing in the workplace, right? That immediately you're going to address and report to the proper legal entities and within your organization going through that process. But also, like part of this dialogue and supporting a young person is understanding that some of this discomfort is due to the characteristics of professional culture, i.e. the characteristics of white supremacy that we've long lived with, but are no longer okay accepting. So what are those characteristics? We have fear as a top one. In this case, in working with a young person, it's, if you don't, that could translate to you saying things like, if you don't get this done, I'm not going to be able to place you. You're never here, you're not attending, you don't seem committed. What's wrong? I'm not going to be able to work with you anymore. You're not going to have a future. It's using language like that. So using fear as a tool. That perfectionism, we can train so much and let them know the expectations, the job description that they're training towards. But, each person functions in their own way. And perfectionism is a really difficult habit to break. And so if we're training these young people to show up and be perfect, there will be no room for learning for them. There will be no room for growth. So we shouldn't be training any longer for perfectionism or doing it one way. And I say that, we have programs that work in the utilities, and there are very specific ways that something has to happen, otherwise the task at hand is incomplete or people can be injured. That's different. Those are directions and expectations for safety that, if a young person is supported through that learning, will be comfortable achieving. But there shouldn't be an expectation right off the bat that they're doing things perfectly. We have the question of being qualified. Are you qualified enough? Have you met these benchmarks? when the reality is we're all constantly learning in our jobs. Even now, as we see individuals who've been unemployed due to COVID being passed over for opportunities, and then you'll see that the job that they apply for is still hiring again. And the question becomes, that panel decided that this individual was underqualified, and so they'll go through the process of looking for more candidates. Well, at what point would it just make more sense to find the person that was a fit but a little underqualified and just support them in training on the job and learning? So these are like questions that come up for youth, for adults, as individuals in the career development space. I think it's up to us to start asking employers more, like, what would it take for you to be willing to do more on the job training and move away from deeming someone qualified or unqualified or underqualified. Getting into the either or binary. Either they have to be college educated, or they're not a right fit. I definitely think in our work specifically that we are really trying to move away from this binary understanding, and especially when it leads to that question of being qualified, right? You kind of find that all of these different characteristics tie in to one another in some way, and we wind up in our own work at one point sometimes reinforcing them while also trying to dismantle them, because as we work with individuals one-on-one, we get to know them and understand their abilities, and we want to advocate. And so we're hearing these expectations from employers and we push back, but then we're still in maybe formal ways working towards these same characteristics. And so we think about equity. This is, of equality and inclusion and diversity and equity. Equity is what we are working towards. Right? And so we can think about shifting these ways of thinking, shifting language in these ways. So fear, of sitting down and saying, you're not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. Let's not have to get to that conversation. Instead, start out clearly setting expectations. And these expectations being around attendance and communication. In communication in particular about, your needs, what is going on in your life that may cause you to not consistently meet expectations. And identifying the hurdles that may be in one's life ahead of time, and coaching them in that way so that they can see laid out in front of them, this is what is expected of you. If there's any tension or fear that you can't meet these expectations, let's talk about this now. Let's not get to the point where you're avoiding or blaming, or me as your counselor or coach is using fear as a tool. You move away from perfectionism and instead encourage a growth mindset, encourage learning. I think in particular, I see this now, I work with young people, and there's always young people who just don't want to learn, but they also aren't realizing that they're learning constantly. They're learning how to play the new game, or they're learning how to use new social. So it's about encouraging them to know there's always room for growing and learning and finding what they want to learn, and coaching them to know that you're not going to get it right away. You are going to experience failure, and that failure, there is space for growth. Qualified, and this is a little confusing, it's like imposter syndrome. And to explain that, we're thinking about, am I qualified enough? Well, that's imposter syndrome in itself in a question, right? So it's educating young people to know you will experience imposter syndrome. You will question if you're qualified enough. And you may not be qualified enough at the moment you asked yourself that question. But ideally, you have an understanding of growth mindset and know that there is space for you to move further towards what you have identified as being qualified. So it's really just about being open and transparent about the idea of imposter syndrome, because we all experience it in different ways in different places. For someone entering a new career or trying to really for the first time find stable income and become self-sufficient, there are going to be times of doubt. So it's not saying to that person, what are you, or rejecting that that's something that they're going through, but acknowledging it and explaining in particular what it looks like in the form of imposter syndrome. The either or binary, we can encourage radical imagination. You know, where are we now and where do you, in 10 years, just imagine all the possibilities if we can just move away from either or, right or wrong. There's not just black and white, there's gray, and within that gray is space for radical imagination. And so, as we're thinking about ways to shift language, to shift habit and interaction with one another, let's think about radical imagination as a useful tool in that process. I'm the only one immediately shifts to it takes a village. And right here, right now in this training, we can see, through the gathering and the umbrella of NYEC, that you can draw people together and create a circle and a community around someone and reinforce to them that they don't have to go through this alone. I think for the JVS team, this is really helpful, because if, I can't do something, I make it very clear that I have wonderful colleagues and a support right behind me that can do it. And that also, in communicating that with the people that we work with, allows me to, let them know you can do the same thing for yourself. What's your network? What social capital do you have? Do you need support in building that, so you don't have to feel like you're the only one, that I have to do this on my own? Individualism is deeply embedded in our culture. It's me, me, me. And so, it's you, but who is also there when you may not have the space or ability or capacity to do it all on your own. And you shouldn't have to do it all on your own. I know there's, in particular, some young people who, haven't had that support. And so first is starting to let them know that you can open up and trust and create your village in a way that fits your needs. And then initially there's a defensiveness and denial as well that we see often. I think this really connects back to fear. When someone's afraid and holding on and gripping, that tends to lead to defensiveness or denial. And so the shift for that is just to pause and name. And so allowing in practice for yourself and practicing with those you serve, finding ways to just say, what I'm feeling now is anxiety, because I am not able to find a placement for you. And instead of wanting to say that it's because of your actions, I can pause and name that maybe it's actions on my part, maybe it's actions on the employer partners that I'm trying to connect you with as well. I have no other answers, but I can at least pause and name and release, so I continue to do the work that I wish to do. And that also can lead to opportunity to call in versus call out. So in that same example, you're trying to place a young person and it's not working out. Instead of going and calling out the young person for not, following through or, doing what they need to do, it's an opportunity to call in and ask, thoughtfully, what they need, why haven't they been following through based on the expectations that were set earlier. If it's something more with an employer partner, which is very tricky, it's finding, once again, instead of calling them out and saying that they are committed to the work that you're trying to do and giving opportunities, it's, asking, if there's maybe another opportunity, maybe something a little more like entry level to just try out, or trying to reconfigure the opportunity instead of just calling out and saying it's not going to work at all anymore, working with them, negotiating. And then if it is comfortable enough, also denoting the points where it felt like your partnership wasn't aligned or isn't aligned. So I just want to pause for a moment and see if there are any questions. I'm looking in the chat right now.
I think the only question is just more examples of the fear from what you talked about earlier, examples of white supremacy.
Yeah, and I also see from Paulinia, is this more of a Western world issue or white supremacy issue? I wouldn't say that there's a difference necessarily in just like Western culture is, the foundation of that is in the belief that, white cisgendered men were superior. And, from colonialism and the specifically American corporate culture that has been translated to other nations. And with globalization, there's been this just kind of like general move forward of like, these are this is how you practice business. This is how you operate professionally. And so it's not either or. I think it's one and the same. The reality of white supremacy culture is like, we're all swimming in it. It's the ocean. We're all in it. The work that we're doing now is trying to step back and name it more clearly, like in what we see here, like in the fear characteristic, for example, and using it to not, well, and so that's how that comes up. And so getting back to the fear, I think it also comes up as jobs being taken away, or you're going to lose your job to someone else who is willing to take less money. Those are also ways in relation to like the professional corporate world and job training that fear comes up and is utilized. And jobs are always changing. Careers are always changing. 100 years ago, the majority of work being done was agrarian. And there was this new thought that maybe some people in the family could go and work in a factory. And factory work became a little more normalized. And so, but then factory work has changed as well. So this is just the reality of the world. There's always change, there's always shift in the work that's being done and how we do it. There's an understanding that we always need to be able to learn and shift and identify what the next opportunity may be. But the fear that is behind that is just from a way to control and manipulate. So I won't, what am I trying to say here? The fear is real. What someone fears, I'm not saying that that's inappropriate or white supremacist. What I'm getting to is the idea that someone can take these large scale fears and weaponize them. And so the expectation really is that jobs will always change, work will always shift based on the needs of the community, the nation. There shouldn't be any fear from that point. Although, with those changes, if you're not prepared for them, you can have real world negative experiences, and we work through that and support in different ways. But that's where I would call that out.
Did you want to continue, or we have one more question though?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Code switching. Should we avoid code switching because it perpetuates white supremacist communication styles?
Yes. I think it's not hiding from the reality that code switching is a thing. It's a thing we all do, right? I am, my demeanor and cadence here with you all, with fellow professionals and colleagues in this space is much different than how I was yesterday in the classroom with high school students, right? That technically is code switching. We show up differently with different people, different groups. So I think for me, how I, address code switching specifically is I tell young people, this is a thing. And in particular, this was a thing, this technique that people were coached to do in order to make mostly white people or people who closely identify with white supremacist culture feel comfortable. And now we are in a place where you being you does not have to depend on whether you're going to make someone uncomfortable or not. Always be respectful, listen, but you do not have to change the cadence of your voice. You do not have to worry about switching between languages if you speak multiple languages in order to feel safe in a professional space. That no longer fits. That is tied to that same binary thinking that there's only she and he, whereas we know very much there's many different ways to identify, and so we're going to leave space for them in how we talk about gender as well. So it's that providing background and being transparent with a young person, that this is not an expectation, and so just I don't think it's something that we should be spending a lot of time on in working with young people. And thank you all for the sharing the resources as well. What we see here right now is just a different visual and thinking about shifting, the isolation and self-sufficiency, which is tied to that individualism as well. Now we're looking to be more relational. This is, there's resilience in relationship. And so we want to cultivate a culture where, dependency is distributed. We all need each other and we're all supporting each other. This wasn't necessarily brought up previously, but there is a tendency to desensitize from the body and nature. Nature, I think in particular, when we, so we want to go back to ecological resilience and connecting to the body, to nature, to ecology. And so that's cultivating a culture of sensitivity to connection. So that's not, actually, that would actually, I would say, connect to the defensiveness and denial. And instead, it's pausing and naming, sensing and feeling within yourself. What's going on right now? What am I feeling? And supporting young people or those you work with and serve to do the same. I think Tara Brock is a good teacher of this. She has the RAIN technique, which is, recognize, I always forget the A, recognize, identify, and name out loud. I forget what the A is, but that is a tool that connects with this as well. And then that culture of supremacy and exclusion, the top floor, the executive, corporate, professional space that we all have learned about being in up until now. It's the hierarchy, the subordinate, manager relationship. Instead, that's thinking about it as, I have my responsibilities and work to do, you have your responsibilities and work to do. If you don't get your work done, I can't get my work done. And we're all not moving forward in our goal of whatever we're creating or working towards. It's kind of getting back to the idea of the assembly line. The piece can't move forward if down the line it's not working. But there's always the assembly line, and then the managers and executives upstairs just observing what was going on. Instead, there's no one observing. Everyone has hands on and is supporting the work and building off of each other. And that's cultivating a culture of sustained inclusion. Removing the silos, walking away from hierarchy. There are always going to be people who are willing to manage as a way to control. That's not going to go away. And some people may want to work in those environments. What we're wanting young people and just people in general to see now, though, is that is not the only way to work. And so I'm going to just go ahead and share with you all the worksheet that I believe has been shared in the chat as well. You each will be able to have a copy for yourself. This was a tool we used within the high school bridge department to lead these conversations. Because first and foremost, it's about identifying and naming. Until you can identify, until you can name, there's no real way to say, yes, that needs to be changed. So you'll see here, we've looking at it in different areas, starting with agency and staff, followed by the application and selection process you may have for your programming, the program participants themselves, and then finally external partners. And you're going through rounds, with your team, with your department, and starting with the intersectional lens, asking yourself, how are the systems and structures of white supremacy reinforced in our work? So for example, with JVS, when we were still in person and we had our offices, but young people were coming from different parts of San Francisco, the city, and they would come to downtown. That in of itself, we identified as something that might be reinforcing white supremacy culture, not meeting the young people where they were. There could be something said for getting them used to being in the environment, going downtown and experiencing that. but there's a difference between them opting in and wanting that experience versus, saying in order for you to be in this program and complete it and move to the next phase, you have to come here and go out of your way at your own expense. So that was, a barrier that we recognize may have been inhibiting some people's success. So you want to go through those things. There's also the, depending on what office space you're in, we had a very nice building, but there's security. And if a young person walked in, they may have been stopped, questioned. We could do our part in letting security know, like, these young people are coming in at this time, expect them, as a way to remove that experience for the young person. But it was still something that happened, and we had to acknowledge it. So you want to think about this when we thought of different application and selection processes for programming. Applications may have been taking young people 3+ hours. Maybe we were asking for banking information and documents that they didn't have access to, or if they needed access to it, it meant taking out time from their parents to go and collect it. And so that created more barriers and added extra time, and maybe became too overwhelming, so they just didn't complete the application. So they were self-selecting out even before they got a chance to be part of our programming. We as a team went through this process in multiple meetings. We left plenty of space. When we were doing this, before and after the meeting, you're going to be having some very heavy experiences, most likely, depending on the stories that are shared and who's in the space. So, make sure if you do plan on going through this process that you allow time before and after, and even during, for people to step away to process. Yeah, sorry, I'm just taking a moment and looking at all the wonderful things being shared in the chat. Thank you all so much. And I will also just point out there are resources at the top of the document. As once again, we don't know where people are at in this process, so just wanting to make sure that they can be guided to the place to learn more. And I just want to wrap up and say, there's still barriers to change that we're experiencing in this work. I can think of young people who we set up with opportunities and to get paid, and their gender identity, they have a dead name, but that's the name that all their banking paperwork and employer documentation is in. So, we haven't figured out how to not have them interact with that dead name, because if we want them to get paid, they're going to need that paperwork. They're going to have to see the check with that name on it until they are able to go through that long and difficult process of a name change. There's still a lot of shifts that need to be made in our partnership side with employers. There's a lot of training and conversations we can have with our young people and clients, but that still doesn't guarantee that once they're in a workspace that they're not going to be up against all those characteristics that we shared with them before. So, at what point do we get a chance to have these more honest conversations with employers about their work culture and expectations? And very open to hearing some of the other roadblocks you all might be experiencing as well in this work as we try to make these shifts. And so with that, I do invite comments or questions before we close out. Yeah.
All right, great. Thank you for that, Mackenzie. So it looks like in the chat, questions are coming in faster than I can read them. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and say your question. All right. Anyone have any questions for Mackenzie? So pretty robust conversation in the chat.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, if I could, that the chat, if you have not had a chance to check it out, there's some great back and forth in there and some wonderful resources. So the people that had those discussions going on, thank you so much for your input. And it's it was just wonderful to see that level of dialogue. So really excited to maybe feature again some more workshops on race equity so that we can dive in more depth.
Yeah, so I would say my parents are baby boomers, and we have a lot of conversations about works. There's things that are changing rapidly when it comes to email and being online, and then there's just the experience of work that really has not changed. And that's, I think, is highlighting that these characteristics that we are starting to openly name and identify are a part of that experience. There's value in working and finding a career or a pathway that you can commit yourself to. And that's where we want to dive in and do that work with a young person, right? It's not about being productive or contributing to the economy. It's about that really special, unique sense of worth that you can get from showing up and being committed and supporting someone on a team. And ultimately, that's getting back to, would I want you to be my colleague? How are we going to work together? How can we support each other?
Mackenzie, could you share with us any resources? I know there's a lot of resources out there. Any ones that you really felt were the most helpful to you?
Yes, definitely. I can go ahead and actually share some of them in chat. One of them is a career readiness framework, some research that was done, and this really touches on the piece about jargon and language that I opened up with. Here again, I know it's in the worksheet as well, but white supremacy, racial equity principles in particular, it explains them even more so than I did. And then we have the Reimagining Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act from June from the National Youth Employment Coalition, which is a really helpful tool for me to review as well. I think when you'll see, especially in these three resources, there are through lines, there are connections to be made, and seeing where we're at now and where we'd like those shifts to be made. And we're seeing it come up through research and conversations with various program participants and alumni as well.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank
All
you.
right. Well, with that, I think we're close to time. Want to respect everyone's time, including yours, Mackenzie. But yeah, just a warm thank you for kicking off our workshop series and imparting some of your insight towards us. I think I could speak for everyone that I learned at least something new, and something that I think we can all take back to our work and the folks that we serve. So, thank you.
Thank you all so much. Be well.